Welcome back to the Deeply Rested podcast. Today's conversation is a powerful examination of what it means to be a leader, specifically what it means to be a liberated leader. How do we step away from the patriarchal, white supremacist, colonized models of leadership that have been handed down to us and instead move towards a style of leadership that is more feminine and sacred and all about honoring ourselves, our communities, and the planet? Well, today's guest was the absolute perfect person to join us to walk us through this process of becoming liberated leaders in our lives and our businesses and our communities. I'm very excited to introduce you to Sophia Apostol. From the moment Sophia experienced her first leadership coaching session as a sales director, she knew she wanted to become a coach herself. 10 years later, Sophia is a professional certified coach with almost 3,000 coaching hours under her belt. Clients say that her coaching style feels like it wraps them up in a warm hug and gives them both the confidence and the courage to audaciously go for their goals and their dreams. I'm really moved by the conversation Sophia and I just had together, and I genuinely cannot wait for you to listen. I would love for you to reach out afterwards and tell me, what were your takeaways, your aha moments, or where would you challenge the things that Sophia and I had to say in this conversation? We are entering an age where we get to share power, we get to share leadership with each other, and we want you to be a part of this conversation right along with us. So thanks for listening. I hope you love meeting Sophia in this conversation, and I can't wait to hear what you think on the other side. Enjoy this episode of Deeply Rested with Sophia Apostol. Welcome to Deeply Rested, the podcast that helps people doing good work in the world take incredibly good care of themselves. I'm your host, retired therapist and disillusioned business coach, Megan Megginson. I'm on a mission to help people like you unlearn the rules that keep you trapped in self-doubt so that you can recover from burnout and finally become deeply rested. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to subscribe to this podcast and join our weekly newsletter at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. Now, it's time for the show. Sophia, welcome to the Deeply Rested podcast.
Thanks, Megan. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so thrilled and so honored to have you here today to talk about leadership. For context, for everyone listening, Sophia and I are recording this conversation the week after the U.S. presidential election. And I'm just trusting the divine timing of this, Sophia, that there's a reason we slated today to record our conversation about leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think we'll have some salient points to make about leadership and rest.
I hope so. I hope so. Okay, well, let's just drop right in and get this conversation going. I'd love for us to start with 2 deep breaths together, if you're open to that.
Yeah.
Great. Let's do that.
I always like to build in a neck stretch with my breath.
Great. I love it. Sophia, I would love for you to tell me about one of the first moments, one of the earliest moments in your life when you realized that you were a leader.
Oh, great question. Yeah, it doesn't make me look good at all, but I'm going to tell the story because it's the truth and it's the one that was like this one.
Thank you.
I can say now that I think until I was 30, I was deeply bought in, didn't know there was a different way to be regarding things like systemic oppressions. So I was completely unaware of my own privilege, completely unaware of the systemic construct of racism, ableism, healthism, anti-fatness, all of this. I had no clue. None. I was just following the capitalistic patriarchal conditioning that I had been given. And then when I was 30, and this is when I've had a couple of different lives. One of my lives was as a librarian. And so I was working as an academic librarian. I was working, in a university or college as an academic librarian. And I was selected to go to this pretty exclusive, quite elite leadership development program for high achievers in the library world, people who would become deans of libraries, library CEOs, stuff like that. And they wanted to get us and start exposing us to this concept of leadership in a focused way, get to know different people. And it was in a beautiful mountainous cabin in the woods. It was just gorgeous, gorgeous place, interior British Columbia. And I was like, oh, I deserve to be here. I've always been very cocky and confident. I have quite an ego and didn't really realize how obnoxious that could be perceived. What I would say now is I was very unaware of my own impact. And in this program, it's a small group of us. It was I think 25 of us. And we were all assigned mentors who were there and who were kind of preeminent in the, Canadian library world and beyond, North American library world. I remember about halfway through, my mentor pulled me aside. We had these scheduled times to talk and get feedback on what they had witnessed in us. And he just sat me down and he looked at me and he goes, Sophia, you don't always have to be the center of attention. And I was like, what? It was such a shock to me. I think firstly, because I don't know if I'd ever really received authentic feedback until that point. And second of all, I had never examined in any real critical way my impact on a space and my impact on others. And this person who I really respected saying that to me was just this moment of, my immediate reaction was, fuck you.
Yeah. Because this is the first time your ego is being challenged in this way. So of course, you have a big reactive response.
Totally. Yep. And it has stuck with me ever since. I think it was probably another 5 years before I really understood what he was getting at. And that came with some additional, a year-long leadership development program. But it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And what it did do right away was it had me start to, in coaching, we call this bring out my observer self. So almost this part of myself that could hover and look at what I'm saying, what I'm doing, and the impact I'm having on others and just observe. I don't think I'd ever activated my observer self before. That really was such a key moment for me and shifted. It's funny, this one comment, I think, really shifted my entire trajectory because it made me want to be the kind of leader who people wanted to follow, weren't trying to distance themselves from, wasn't taking up all the space in the room, was building others. That was a pretty powerful moment for me.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing a story, like you said, that doesn't make you look like the greatest. But honestly, it does make you look like the greatest, right? Because I think what we know as leaders is that honesty and authenticity are what we look for in strong leaders who we trust, leaders who we want to follow. So here was this moment where you were just existing in the world. This was a real leveling up on your adulthood journey moment to realize, wait a minute, I need to zoom out and examine how people are experiencing me, what my impact is in the spaces that I am a part of. And as you were expanding that lens, it almost sounds like your understanding of what it meant to be a leader was changing and evolving right along with you changing and evolving as a person.
Yeah, I feel like it went from one-dimensional to three-dimensional because I think before that comment, I just thought, here I am entertaining in a room. People are looking, people are listening.
Oh, yeah.
Versus 3D, which was okay, but how are they feeling? What are they getting? What's the impact I'm having? Is it an intentional or unintentional impact? What's happening in the energy field of the room? What's happening in the space? I didn't know there were more layers. So that was huge.
what's really standing out to me right now is that you experience this shift of leadership as a performative act to leadership as a relational way of being.
Beautiful. Yeah, exactly.
Which is so powerful, because a lot of the harmful leadership that I've experienced in my life, and on small scale and large scale, come from ego-driven leadership that's more about the performance than it is about the relationships, the environments that we're creating. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to ask you a question related to that, because you talk in your work about how everyone is a leader. Yeah. We're all leaders. We all have leadership potential. And I feel the truth of that in my bones. I feel it. But it also makes me wonder, if everyone is a leader, then how do we define what it means to be a leader? How do we categorize what leadership is?
Yeah. I think this is an amazing question. I actually think not only do we all have leadership potential, but I think we are all able to be leaders in every moment of our lives. And that leadership is not tied to positionality on a corporate hierarchy ladder. I really think we get to be leaders in every moment of our lives. The second piece of what you said is I don't have any huge answers for, which is, so then what is leadership? I feel like I talk about this with my clients all day, every day, for 5 solid years now as like a dedicated full-time leadership coach. And I think I can provide a one-pager that has a breakdown of what is leadership. And it has words like executive presence and influence and persuasion and, you know, self-regulation and self-management and relationship. All of those words, all important. So sure, yeah, I think that's a part of what makes people leaders. But the work that I get really excited to do with individuals is, what is their version of leadership? It reminds me of Deepa Iyer's social change ecosystem, which is a really beautiful graphic that depicts all the ways that we can create impact in our world from a social change perspective. My assumption until I saw this map was that in order for me to advocate for a cause, let's just say anti-racism, I had to get to the streets and march. Like that was the only kind of version of activism I'd ever seen. What Deepa Iyer's work does is actually break it down to, I think, 12 different possibilities, like caregiving is an act of social justice and social activism, and a contributor to the ecosystem, right? Storytelling, writing, yes, marching in the streets for sure. But like there's all these different ways. And the way I interact with that idea is, what is best for me? Like, how can I serve with the privilege that I have, the capacities that I have, the capabilities that I have? And so I always find that a beautiful metaphor for this question of how do we all step into our version of leadership? Because I don't think, and I'm curious what your experience is with this, Megan, like, I don't want to be the same kind of leader as the bosses I've had. Nothing wrong with them, most of them. Some of them there was something wrong with, but others less so.
Yeah, right.
But it's like, but I am not them. So there are things that I might admire, but like, what's my version of that? And so that's what I spend my days talking to people about is, what is your version of leadership? If I say, because they all come to me, the two buzzwords right now in corporate, like performance and promotion review times, are influence and executive presence. So people come to me and they're like, okay, I've been told I need to develop my executive presence and my influence. And I'm like, amazing, great. What does that mean to you? And they're like, I don't know. I thought you could give me like a 5-point checklist. I'm like, no.
I don't know. I'm paying you to help me understand what that means.
I know. Give me the checklist. What I need to do. And I have checklists and I look at them, but it'll say things like develops relationships. Cool. That's a key component of executive development or executive presence. But like how I develop relationships as a highly extroverted, deeply, I'm an Enneagram 3. So I'm all about connecting with people from like a cheerleading kind of perspective is very different than someone who might be a more introverted, different type of Enneagram or a different type of personality, right? So my version of building relationships is going to be like a slew of coffee dates, Zoom-based. I'm going to email everybody. And I have people where I say that to, and they're like, Sophia, I cannot do that. I'm like, great. What's your version? What could you do? Oh, I could write a newsletter. Great. Let's do that. So this is the thing. So that's why I don't have a clear answer of what is leadership. It really depends.
This is great.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a couple of thoughts, questions. Yeah. Let's put a pin in the Enneagram. I want to come back to that a little bit later in this conversation. Okay. But as I'm listening to you, like the kind of flashing lights going off in my mind are like, okay, what we're talking about here is really decolonizing leadership, right? Yeah. We're taking leadership out of the paradigm of the patriarchy.
Yes.
Because when we're looking at these sort of, quote, conventional models of leadership that many of us grow up seeing in corporate or the business world or wherever it might be, it looks a very certain way, right? It requires everybody climbing the same ladder, all working towards the same titles to kind of claim these positions of power over lots of people who exist underneath you. Yeah. And what I hear you describing, and of course it's hard to find the words to describe it because this doesn't exist in the norm of our society. What I hear you describing is a much more feminine frame for what it means to be a leader. And what I'm hearing from you, tell me if I'm getting this right, is that leadership is really about understanding yourself, understanding who you are, what your gifts are, what your calling is, what your mission is, and then being of service in a way that really is aligned with your gifts. Leadership is being in service through the gifts that you come to naturally in this lifetime. And that's going to look different for every single person that we encounter. But it's also why every single person has the potential to be a leader, because we all have innate gifts that we can use in the world. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is why we're talking 1 week post-election, because what we're seeing with Trump and all these people who are deeply unqualified that he's appointing to the various positions, they are all deeply rooted in extractive capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy. Like, they are people who put their own power and desire for money first.
Yeah. And
that has been historically, and when I say historically, it's actually a short history. It's not since the world formed. This is really only, I don't know, someone can correct me, a historian, but it was only in like the late 1700s where we started colonizing this, like North America. And what that brought along with enslaved people was the creation of racism. It was 100% created to create distinctions between white aristocracy and enslaved people so they could be dehumanized. And they set themselves up as, we are morally, ethically, in all ways superior. And that hasn't changed. So it's been about 300 years. And we've just fucking accepted it. And it's a beautifully built system. It is working the way it should because, look, Trump is elected. So, I 100% vehemently, with every fiber of my body, if it's not clear enough, disagree that this is the way we should go, because most people are harmed by this. Deeply harmed. And how dare we harm not only the people, but our planet?
I really want to dial in to the timeline of this, because there's like an avenue of hope here when we look at this through the lens of like, this is a young system. Yeah. It's only been 300 years, or fill in the blank, however many hundred years it's been. Yeah. It's like, this isn't permanent. This isn't real. No. This isn't forever. We can claim our individual power, our sovereignty as healers, as leaders, as mission-driven people, that we can claim this sovereignty within ourselves, step into our own leadership potential, and together, collectively, one person at a time, we can dismantle the rule book right? Because it's not real. It's not real, but we were born into it. So, it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're not looking.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And that gives me hope. It definitely gives me hope.
Yes.
I wish it was faster.
It gives me hope too. Who doesn't? Yeah. We're ready for the timeline here to end and for a new timeline to begin. And how do we create that new timeline?
Yeah.
How do we create that new world? How do we create something different? By coming into ourselves.
Yes.
And so let's come back to leadership again, because here we are. It's like we have to really dismantle this outdated story that only a few get to hold the power.
Yes.
Only a few people get to be leaders. And we have to just dismantle that whole paradigm and instead ask every single person we encounter, hey, what's your unique style of leadership? Like, what's the gift that you are here to share?
Yeah.
And I want to get really specific now, Sophia, if you're open to it, to talking about this for small business owners. Because I think that small business owners get really lost in the shuffle of this conversation because the models, the leadership models that we have to look at do exist in these like large corporate paradigms that just don't translate over to the reality of like the life of the small business owner. So let's talk about some things small business owners can start to ask themselves to develop their own leadership identity.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this might be where we bring back Enneagram / other kind of assessment tools. Personally, I love a quiz. I'm like BuzzFeed. What are the way I like my scrambled eggs say about me? I'll take it. I'll take that quiz. What kind of witch am I? I 100% will take that one every time on Instagram. So I think...
What kind of witch are you? I need to know now.
Oh gosh, I've taken so many. What was the one I took last? Oh, I think I was like a raven, almost like a low-key, mischiefy kind of witch, which delighted me.
Yes.
I feel like I'm like, that side of me is turning up a little more as I get older and don't give a shit about most things anymore. I'm like, oh, here's some trickster energy coming at you. So I think one of the easy ways for small business owners, because the last thing you need is probably more expenses, but to take some of these assessments, and there's a great website called Truity, TRUITY.com, and you can take the Enneagram assessment. I believe you can also do the Myers-Briggs, and I feel like there's another one. I'm not a huge fan of the Myers-Briggs, nothing wrong with it, but it's actually not really based on real science. There's like a whole episode of the Maintenance Phase podcast where they kind of tracked the origin of it. It's a little questionable. It's fine. It's not bad, but I think the Enneagram to me is just a lot more usable. And then don't buy the test results if you don't want to. It'll pop up your results, grab a screenshot, and there's tons and tons of free Enneagram stuff online. So I think every small business owner, and I think every human truly, should start by learning more about themselves. What do you know about yourself? Do you even know if you're more introverted or extroverted, or are you ambiverted? Do you even know what your conflict style is? Do you know what your core motivator is? Do you know what other people can do to motivate you? I think a lot of times when I talk to people, I think a lot of people know some of this, but they've just never stopped to like put it all together before. So if I say to someone, hey, in your business, do you get energized by doing the networking part, reaching out to people, or does that drain you? And if they're like, oh, no, I love, like, I'm in the Starbucks line and I talk to someone and I pass out my card, that's totally my jam. It's like, okay, you're probably quite extroverted then. Great. How do we capitalize on that to build your business? Versus like someone who is more introverted. I think of my husband, who is deeply introverted, runs his own small business. He's a children's book illustrator. And honestly, he'll hate if I say this, but he'll forgive me. Like at least once a month, he's like, oh, I really should get to a networking event, or I really should like just make more of an effort on social. But he is a deeply profound introvert. So those activities are like walking through mud for him. So why? He'll never do it, and it causes him angst. So it's like, okay, well, that's not your vibe, but what is? What do you bring to the table? What else could you do? So I think my first step with most people is like, let's figure out who you are, what your strengths are. There's another assessment, this one I think you do have to pay for, called Strengths Finder, which I'm a big fan of as well. It kind of details out your strengths. But like, having some kind of outside source, like some of these assessments, or even you literally could just like ask 10 of your people to say, could you give me 5 adjectives or 5 words that you think describe me? And a lot of times you'll recognize a lot of them and you'll still be surprised by some of what people come back with. And that's good. That just gives you something to work with. So I do think it's important to start there.
Yeah. I love this. I want to add a couple things into the mix, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I really like what you're saying about narrowing down is the way my brain is making sense of this right now. Okay, step one is you're really stepping into the reality that you are in fact a leader and you're wanting to dial that in a little bit. Well, we can dial it in by finding a system of knowledge that really resonates with my experience of the world, with my experience of myself, that just helps you begin to deepen into what is true about you. Yeah. I know the Enneagram is so helpful for many people. I have found the most inspiration and clarity through human design and the gene keys.
Nice.
I will say that like my husband really resonates with the Myers-Briggs because he studies archetypal Jungian psychology, which I think is where people really get the most juice out of the Myers-Briggs assessment. But then my friends and colleagues who aren't woo at all, they're gonna default to the Strengths Finder. They're gonna default to the Colby assessment, right? They're gonna default to something that feels a little bit more logical, a little more evidence-based. And I think it's important to remember that all of these things are made up. Yeah. They're all made up by somebody. So just try them all on, right? I have done every single one of these things. Myers-Briggs, it just didn't really resonate. Enneagram resonated a little bit. Strengths Finder, I was like, thumbs down, so bored. And then I got to human design, and I was like, oh, okay, here's what's resonating. Here's what's speaking to me.
Yeah.
I love this invitation that you're giving people to like experiment, find a system that helps you understand yourself. And then that's just the beginning of a lifetime of remembering who you are.
Yes. I want to ask you if I can, Megan, I'm so curious with all those assessments that you did, what are 1 or 2 things that really struck you as, oh, this I can bring to my business. This connects into the leader I want to be within my work.
About human design specifically? Or
any of
them?
Any of them. Yeah.
Well, I think human design definitely spoke the most to me. And we have an episode on this podcast with my human design reader who really like opened this door for me. Yeah. Jess Rose is her name. She's phenomenal. What human design really helped me understand about myself, it helped me to see more clearly the ways in which I was operating because I was taught that's how I was supposed to operate, right? It helped me see more clearly my own conditioning, capitalist conditioning, patriarchal conditioning. And then it illuminated the kind of core qualities or the core essence that was actually true about who I am. And because it was really intentionally shining a light on here's the conditioning, but here are the core truths, it made it that much easier for me to continue the deconditioning process so that I could organically learn more and discover more about the truer, deeper parts of myself. That's where it really just, it sang for me. And same, I'm newer to the Enneagram. I'm just like starting to explore it, but I'm feeling like similar vibes from that exploration. But I know this is something that you actually talk about, Sophia, with leaders, is how important it is to clear away belief systems that are imposed upon you. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This shows up all the time. I mean, because our default reactions are often reactions to stimulus, and that could be an email that we received that the tone is like, what? Or a difficult conversation, or you're about to lead a presentation or run a meeting or, meet a prospective client, whatever it is. And how we show up in those moments, if we are unconscious and not at choice with how we respond, what that means then is that we are reacting by default, and default reactions have been pre-programmed into us, right? So in my case, my default, I'm an Enneagram 3, classic I'm Enneagram 3, which means huge people pleaser. And I am deeply motivated by the praise, recognition, total adoration of others, AKA my worthiness depends on what other people think of me. That was programmed into me as a child. If I look back, it's so clear. I wish I'd seen it when I was 5, but I was right in it. Oldest child.
But where would the fun be in life, though, if we figured this out when we were 5?
Who knows what I could have been doing at this point.
Oldest child.
Oldest child. Child also of immigrant parents who were deeply poor growing up and believed that education, and I don't disbelieve any of this. I'm just saying this is how I was programmed. Education is the only way to escape poverty. So therefore, it was like straight A's or consequences, you know? I can layer all the stuff on there. And so what that means is that as I grew up, as I stepped into being a leader in terms of leading other people, in terms of just kind of being a decision maker, it was so easy for me to make decisions based on what's going to make everyone else happy. Who cares if it's better for the organization? Who cares if it's okay for me? I want everyone to love me, right? That's how my worthiness was connected. That's what was programmed. I'm also, my gender is also female. I was assigned female at birth. I was raised as a female. So there's that added gender layer too of like girls are inserts, nice, kind, quiet, acquiescing, like that's kind of also, it was a little bit of less about how I was raised, but more what was kind of present in our culture when I was becoming a girl in the 80s and 90s,
Yes.
So all of that comes together and impacts how I did in the past respond to situations in any given moment. And the work that I do with people is like, okay, let's notice those patterns. Like I'll ask things like, where in your life, in other parts of your life, in your past, where has this shown up before? And most people will say, oh, if I think about it, I see exactly where it came from. It's like, okay, so you can see why your reaction to a situation is the way it is. And they'll usually say, yeah, I really get it. Okay, cool. Now, our work is to figure out what do you want to do instead? How do you actually want to be at choice and be responsive? So you could still choose to act the same way. I could still choose to people please. But the fact that I'm doing it with consciousness and being at choice with it is totally different than just doing it by default. Or I can choose a myriad of different options.
I love that what you're describing is basically just good therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's actually, if we go back to what we were saying at the beginning of like, okay, there are two choices. You can be a performative leader or you can be a relational leader. And when you choose, or, I might also say you can be like a masculine-driven leader, a kind of a wounded masculine-driven leader, or more of a feminine leader or a balanced feminine-masculine leader. And when you're traveling that path of leadership, so much of what it means to be a good leader is to be a healed person, right? And to be someone who's like, you're doing your own work. You're looking at these patterns. You're looking at these conditioned behaviors. You're healing those wounds and you're making more conscious choices about how you actually want to show up in the world. So that's one part of what you walk leaders through. It's really looking at what beliefs, what behaviors have been ingrained into you. And now let's find your power and let go of what doesn't serve and really move towards what feels more aligned. I love that.
Yeah.
You also talk about, and you're kind of getting here already, you talk about the importance of understanding intersectionality and marginalization as leaders. Can you say more about that?
This is such a huge piece. I think if we are unaware of our own privilege, then we're walking through the world, interacting with other people from a very unconscious perspective. So I, as an educated middle-class white woman, if I'm talking to, I have a client, I'll just use a real example, who is a Black woman at a senior level in an organization that at her level, she is the only woman and she's the only Black person. There's multiple levels here. So I'm her coach working with her. If I go into that conversation unaware of the unique challenges that Black women face by merit of being Black and by merit of being female, then she might say something to me like, they keep telling me I'm aggressive and they call me a bitch behind my back. I might say, well, are you being a bitch? I might not understand that there is a lot of racism rooted in comments like that. Those types of comments are, it's the stereotyping that happens and shows up in the workplace all the time. I work with a lot of people of color as clients, and this is something, whenever I name it, they're always like, oh, thank you for naming it. No one believes me when I say what's going on. So we don't make it about the individual. We also recognize that there are organizational and systemic structures in place that impact all of those men around the table with my client. And most of those men are probably unconscious to their own white privilege in the moment and are having reactions to my Black female client that they're unaware of how they're actually being microaggressive towards her. What would the verb be? Microaggressive-y towards her. That's not the right word, but we're going to use it.
I love it. That's great. Let's use it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's important for all of us, no matter if this is like a solopreneur sending out a newsletter to, you running, let's say, a group of 10 people, I think it's so important that we understand the privilege that we have, that we own it, know that, and this is something contentious that people don't like when I say it, but I'm going to say it because I do believe it's true. I, as a white person, cannot help but be racist because I am white and I've been raised in a culture that has brainwashed me my whole life. I mean, go back, watch a movie from the 80s. I mean,
Or don't.
Yeah, or don't. Just take my word for it, right? Just don't do it, And so when we talk about decolonizing, when we talk about unlearning, my work as a white person is to recognize where I have been unconsciously biased against people of color. My work as a heterosexual person is to recognize where I have been unconsciously biased against queerness, against trans folks, right? So I think once we take like the very fun Enneagram, human design, how do you like your scrambled eggs stuff, I really do think the next level is going deeper to understand, okay, so now I understand a little bit about me. I'm opened up to that. Now, where am I still unconscious in my interactions with others? And I'm not going to make myself wrong for it. This all happened to me non-consensually, I can now choose to open my eyes. I can choose to understand more and do differently.
There's two things you're saying here that are really resonate. I mean, everything you're saying really resonates, but two things in particular are standing out to me. One is this beautiful wisdom that the best thing you can do on this journey is to start with the self-exploration first. Because I do find that the more solid I feel about who I am, the more resourced I can be in these harder, more challenging conversations about intersectionality, marginalization, privilege.
Yeah, why that is because if you haven't done that work, you take everything as a personal attack. Right? So that's what changes. You realize, oh, okay, I actually don't need to take that so personally. That's not about me. That's probably about someone else. Because I give myself my own sense of worthiness. And if we fully believe in our own worthiness, we can look at any part of ourselves and know that it's not wrong or bad and that we can change and grow from it.
Okay, zooming out for a second, this is so important. And if we look at horrible leaders like Trump as an example, like leaders who have no sense of self, right? Leaders who haven't done this personal community work. I say personal in that, like, I'm exploring myself, I'm healing myself, community in that I am looking at the world around me and I am understanding my place in the fabric of this society. When people haven't done that work, they look like that, right? They look defensive, they look reactive, everything's personal, everything's a fight, everything's aggressive. So it just like what you're saying, it's it's resonating so strongly, Sophia, that when you are stepping into leadership, you are committing to being deeply engaged in your own personal development process, that you can't do this work without really strengthening your sense of self, understanding who you are so that you have the ability to receive this information in a less reactive way. Doesn't mean it's not challenging, but because, like you said, because you're not personalizing it, you can actually be a part of the solution and not just feel like victimized by critical feedback.
Yeah. The other thing I think that happens, and I've seen it happen, I've experienced it myself, is a deeper sense of true, almost like radical empathy gets created.
Yes.
You know?
Say more about radical empathy.
So what I mean by that is you have an appreciation of how people come to be the way they are, because I once was also that way. And I was just talking to my husband about this morning. We were lamenting about like, how could so many people have voted for Trump? And I was like, you know, it just really hit me in a big way that I, again, from a deep place of privilege, was able to work with therapists, was able to get coach training, which deepened my own sense of awareness of self. I was able to work for organizations that brought in trainers who taught us about social justice, about anti-oppression work, about what it means to walk a liberatory path. I benefited from so many people teaching me a different way. And that's not the experience for most people. Most people, our society teaches us, our culture teaches us, oh my God, I hate this about our culture. It teaches us that we must run screaming from discomfort and privileged comfort, because this work is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable to reckon with the fact that there are things that I remembered when I started doing deeper anti-oppression work where I was like, oh shit, that's why that person reacted that way. I did that. I caused them harm. Okay, what do I need to do about that? How do I never do that again? That's uncomfortable. What society tells us, a capitalist society says, don't feel uncomfortable, go buy a new car. Don't feel uncomfortable, go buy something to assuage that feeling, right? And so there's this whole thing around like when we are fully resourced and we do our own work, we develop more tolerance for discomfort, because it's the only way that we can actually develop ourselves further is by being present to this discomfort. And radical empathy then can show up because my ability to tolerate discomfort has grown exponentially. I can have compassion for whoever I'm talking to, wherever they are on their own journey to, you know, self-actualization, enlightenment, liberation, whatever we want to call it. And I can just hold all of us differently. So that's when I think about radical empathy, that's what I think about. It's like radical empathy for me and for you.
Yeah.
You know?
I just want to let that sit for a second. Radical empathy for me and for you. And that to be a person who can hold the space for radical empathy, you have to be committed to all of this work that we're talking about right now. And also, sometimes we gotta not be in radical empathy for a moment.
Oh, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I think like this week is a good example of that. Like there are moments like when you just gotta rage, you know, and you just gotta be like, fuck all of you.
Oh, yeah.
Get that out, move that through the system. But what I find, and it's sounding like a similar process for you and talking to your husband, right? It was like, wow, how did people do this? And there was like rage. And then you moved that through and you took a breath and it's like, okay, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Let me come back to radical empathy. Like, let me come back to this more expansive way of understanding people and relationships and the myriad of oppressive systems that we are all trying to navigate our way through.
Yeah.
Which actually brings me to the second point that I want to highlight, something that's lighting up for me as I'm listening to you. This examination around intersectionality and marginalization, it goes both ways, right? You're talking a lot about how important it is that we as leaders are examining our own privilege, that we're examining how we're showing up, how we're engaging in the world. But then thinking about the example of your coaching client, the Black woman who is in the C-suite at a corporation, that it's also really important that we look at the intersections of our identity where we ourselves are marginalized, and that we have people who are able to reflect back the reality of that. Because sometimes we can't see, especially when we are white, middle class, right? For me, at least, it's easy for me to fall into a place where I'm like, well, I'm the problem. So I've just got to, I've got to do all of this work to be a better person in the world. And I can ignore a little bit the ways in which whoa, there are places where I too am marginalized. And if I don't give that some love and attention, then I get out of balance as a person. I don't know. It's not very well thought through, but do you have any thoughts about how we balance both sides of that?
Oh, such a good point. I mean, the word that's flashing in my head is compassion. We have to have compassion for ourselves with respect to all of that. I think many of us have some form of marginalization. If you're women, that's a marginalization. If you were anything other than a white, cis, hetero, wealthy dude, there is some level of marginalization. And Sonia Renee Taylor, who is a brilliant writer and poet and fat activist, someone who was I call her one of my fat elders. She really helped me on my fat liberation journey. So she talks about the ladder of body hierarchy. Because what's so interesting to me about all of this, Megan, is all of this comes back to bodies and how we appear to others physically. And so she talks about the body hierarchy ladder and how if you imagine this ladder at the top is the most privileged and it scales all the way down to the bottom of the ladder. And what systemic oppression teaches us, all of these systems are put in place to have us desiring to crawl over each other to get closer to the top of that ladder. That idea of proximity to whiteness, which is why I think a lot of white women voted for Trump. That's going to bite them in the ass later, but just leave that comment there. And so I think understanding, thinking about things that way, it's okay, so where am I on the ladder? Can I just step off the ladder? What happens if I just step off? What does that allow for me to do? What does that not allow for me to do? How can I balance my needs and theirs? Yeah.
Can you paint a picture for me? What happens when you step off?
I'll speak to my experience. So I am female, I am neurodivergent, and I am fat. So I have kind of 3 marginalizations. And my stepping off the ladder included things like just stopping dieting, stopping weighing myself, just letting go of other people's ideas of what my body should be, actually learning about bodies and body size and punching holes in diet culture because it's all made up and it's all false. Body diversity has always been present. So that was big. Also letting go of the female programming I had received around being nice. I'm so nice. I was so nice all the time, so kind. So stopping that. So and a whole bunch of other stuff, the neurodivergence, actually understanding what that means, asking for accommodations when I need them. So stepping off the ladder in that I'm not going to hide this to get one rung up.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be nice and give away my own self-authority, my own self-agency in order to get one rung up. I'm not going to try to shrink my body anymore to try to get higher up the ladder. So what's beautiful about that work, and I would call this, this is the liberation journey. This is how you liberate yourselves from that ladder. Man, it is so good. I felt, and I still feel like my brain power can be used. Once I stopped doing calorie math, my brain was like, whoa, quantum physics. Okay. It was just I could just think about so many other things. When I started getting accommodated for the way my brain works, I could engage with material totally differently. There's so much freedom and so much joy. I would never go back. And it's hard too. It's hard because it also meant there are people in my life, family members, friends, who I've gone no contact with. Because it was hard for them to, stop harming me. Yes. And so it's not a perfect system. It can't be. No system is perfect. But I know that I would never trade getting off that ladder as much as I can. Now, I'm still on the ladder because I have rent to pay. I have to work. Yep. So there are some things that force us, but I really very consciously try, like, what else can I divest from? Can I divest from this? Can I divest from things like perfectionism? Perfectionism is a white supremacist trait. How can I not be perfectionist? You know?
Yeah.
So little things like that. It's been the most rewarding journey of my life, and I would not change it at all. Yeah.
I am so in love with you right now. Just like deep love and gratitude for what you're saying and the way that you're sharing it. I could listen to you talk about this all day. There is something so intense and violent and visceral about this image of bodies crawling over each other, trampling one another to climb the ladder, and everything in me relaxes and wants to cry and wants to dance with joy when you say, I am not going to hide this part of my identity so that I can get one rung up this ladder. And what happens instead when I step away from the pile of bodies and say, hold up, how can I make a different choice here? And how could that choice maybe benefit not just me, but everyone all around me? And I think like that's what liberated leadership is really all about. It's that we get to start showing up in a way that's so symbiotic. It's good for my body. It's good for my community. It's good for the earth. That there is a way of being a leader and there is a way of moving through this life that does a lot less harm than the way we've been taught that we need to move through life. And it's why I'm so passionate about doing this work. I mean, we're thinking specifically in our work about how we step off the ladder of capitalism, right? How do we become deeply rested as business owners? How do we opt out of harmful beliefs like you gotta hustle, grind, be productive, focus on making money, etc.? So I'm really grateful that you're bringing more examples to the table right now around how we treat our bodies, how we treat each other, that we can think about this through every lens of our life. How can I step off the ladder and make a different choice? And that's what it means to be a leader, is to be someone who is asking yourself these big questions. How can I make a different choice? A choice that harms me less, harms my community less, harms the environment less. You can't go wrong when you ask yourself those questions, and there will be consequences. I want to add a tally to that column that like you will lose relationships, probably, right? There will be rub. People don't like it when you step off the ladder, right? They're really invested in you staying on the ladder, which kind of leads me to the last thing I want to talk to you about today, Sophia, which is how lonely it can be sometimes to be on the leadership path. I want to hear your thoughts on, like, from both sides of it, how and why this can be a lonely journey, but then also, like, what we can do to create more connection and community so that we don't feel so alone when we're making choices to step off the ladder.
Yeah. How and why it can be lonely, I think I'll speak from my experience, which I think is emblematic for a lot of people, that there's a deep grief that comes with knowing that people will choose to continue harming someone they ostensibly love and care about rather than be in the discomfort of their own self-examination. So this means me saying to a good friend, hey, that comment that you said was really harmful to me. It felt like you were making judgments about my body, about my choices, and that did not feel good. And that person not able to hold that comment. It's like saying to my mom, hey, you don't get to ask me about what I eat or how I move my body anymore. I'm putting a hard boundary on that. And if you ask, I'm going to hang up, and years of hang-ups. You know? So there's a grief. There's like but I thought you loved me, or I thought you cared about me. And that's what the people who are up close to you. It's also really hard when the systems give you those messages. right? So
Right. Yeah.
again, just sticking with the fatness marginalization, going to any kind of medical visit and being judged immediately for body size versus actual health indicators like blood tests or things not being designed to fit a body. So this would be a Black man walking down the street and people crossing the street to be away from him. A Black woman speaking out in a meeting and everyone saying, "Oh, you're so aggressive. You're speaking so loudly, like lower your voice." There's so many examples. Someone who has an invisible disability and gets questioned about why they're sitting instead of standing, like tons and tons of stuff like this.
Yeah.
And so there is this constant harm that's being done that shows up as extra labor that people have to do or conversations that they're forced to have, which is also that labor piece, or being othered in some way. So that feeling of being othered, I think, is the hard part of this.
I want to just layer one thing
Yeah.
onto that. I really appreciate those examples, right? Okay, what does it mean to be a leader, right? I'm doing my work. I'm stepping into my sovereignty, to my authority. I'm asking hard questions. I'm making different choices, right? I'm making choices that most of the people around me aren't making. And there are consequences of that. And one consequence is often that the community that you were surrounding yourself with before, you start to see the cracks in those relationships. You start to see the ways in which you're not actually totally values aligned. For me, I've had a lot of wounds the past couple of years and losing relationships with really close friends, especially friends I made in the business space as I've started making different choices and to devalue capitalist ideals in my business. It's hard for some people to stay friends with me because what I stand for now is in direct conflict with the way they're showing up in the world.
Yes.
So things start falling apart, right? People start falling away. We start noticing how we are distanced from others in the world, in our communities, which leads to the second question, which is how do we remedy that? What is the medicine for loneliness when we are becoming liberated leaders?
Yeah. I think for many people, the answer is community. When those cracks occur, when people fall away, it's creating a new group of people. This is where I remember hearing 20 years ago, the term chosen family or creating a family of choice. And I'd never even known that was an option or it was the concept of it was I can do that. That's allowed. I don't have to just ride or die with my birth family and that's it.
Right.
And my birth family is great, but we're very different. We are very different now. We have walked separate paths over the last 10 years and it has been everything to build a family of choice. It has been everything to find community of people who, we kind of hold the same things dear. We're working towards a future that honors human rights and the planet, right? And so I think community can mean both people who we admire up close and also people who we admire from afar. I mean, every time I think about the word rest, which of course is in your podcast title, so I've been thinking about it a lot, I immediately think of Trisha Hersey. She doesn't know who I am, but I love her. I love her because she was so impactful in me, a classic hyperachiever, understanding how destructive that was and where I needed to unlearn some of that. So I think there can be, it's families of choice and communities of choice is a really important one.
This is a real beautiful moment I'm having right now in my own mind and body because I've thought a lot about family of choice. I mean, that's kind of in the zeitgeist. We talk about family of choice, but I've never heard someone talk about community of choice. And I think I just want to let that sit here for a second, that if you're on this path and you're feeling the rub of the more you step into your role in the world, your role in your business, the more you become a powerful leader in your tiny slice of the universe. If you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling disconnected, if you're starting to wonder if this path is worth it, begin to search for your community of choice, because those people are out there. And I totally agree that the medicine for me, the thing that kind of mends the wounds and keeps me going, are people with whom I can show all parts of myself. All parts, right? I can share all values and be challenged, which I want to be around people. I'm an Enneagram challenger, by the way, FYI.
You're an 8.
So like, I'm an 8. Like, I want to be challenged, but I want to be challenged with love and compassion and curiosity and acceptance. And I'm building that. I'm building my community of choice. And I'm feeling how deeply important that is on my own journey. So thank you so much for saying that. I have one final question for you before we wrap up.
Well, I was just going to reflect back to you that thank you for doing this work for business owners, because I was in sales and marketing for a lot of my career. So I was a librarian, I was in sales, I was marketing, now I'm a coach. I've done all the things. I was also a professor for a while. Anyway, I've done a lot of stuff. And when I was in sales and marketing, all of everything that you read, and even when you look at leadership, when people are like, recommend these leadership textbooks, all of them are white dudes deeply rooted in capitalist ideals. And so when I discovered feminist-run businesses, people like you, we have not lots of people in common who really focus this, who focus on consent, who focus on just doing business differently. It was astonishing to me how I never knew about it before. And the fact that there are these communities really growing everywhere is so exciting, Megan. The fact that you're able to talk to business owners about rest and how important it is to not fall prey to toxic productivity and positivity too, but productivity
and positivity too.
Yeah, right. is how I think we do change this world, is just the groundswell of people choosing differently. And I'm so excited. So thank you for the work that you do, because you're creating that community. Like, I don't follow or read any white dudes anymore. I just don't. I'm just done with their voices. I've had them in my head for 40 years. I'm like, where are my women? Where are my people of color? That's who I want to learn from now. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, they've taken up enough shelf space.
Yes.
And like, my psychic shelf space for white men is all used up.
It's used up.
And I'm sure that there are really great dudes out there saying really great things, but I'm like, I need to diversify what lives inside of this. Thank you, Sophia, for your kind words. I'm really taking them in and feeling them, because this isn't easy. No. This path isn't easy. And I feel deep in my soul the importance of perseverance and resiliency and moving towards what my body tells me is right. So thank you for those words, and thank you for being here. And I have one more question for you, just to end on an empowering note, because like you said, you're the cheerleader type.
Yes.
You like to cheerlead. So circling back to where we are in this moment in time, like the models that we're seeing of the leadership that the people are choosing are thumbs down, 2 thumbs down, do not recommend personally.
Yeah.
If you've listened this far in this episode, I would be shocked if you didn't feel that as well. Okay, but we know what we don't want, right? We know what we don't want. And after this conversation, we're getting a little bit clearer about what we do want. So I would love to hear from you. What words of advice do you have for the small business owners listening right now who are feeling empowered to step into more of a leadership role in their communities?
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of doing tiny things. I always joke with people, I'm like, I want you to feel like slightly nauseous, but not like full vomit. So pick something to do. Like, a little nauseous shows a bit discomfort. It's a bit of an edge. Great. We want to do a bit of an edge thing. So what I love to suggest for people is pick something that feels like it aligns with your strengths. You know, maybe that's reaching out to someone for a connection. Maybe that's sending a newsletter. Maybe that's offering something that feels good to you, whatever it is with your business. And whatever that goal is, I want you to cut it in half and then cut it in half again to the point where it feels ludicrous. Because it's like, but that's so easy. Yes. That's also how I want you to feel. The goal should make you queasy, and then the thing that you do should be easy. I just made that up. I might have to trademark that.
I think like right away.
I just made that up. What? That's so cool. The goal can make you queasy, but the first step, maybe I'm going to change it. The goal can make you queasy, but
the task
should be easy. That's it. There we go. We've just co-created a brand new tagline.
Yeah. I am so thrilled. This is so amazing. The goal should make you queasy, but the task should be easy. Oh my God, that is brilliant.
Because otherwise you'll never do it.
It rhymes.
And it rhymes. I love a rhyme.
Because otherwise you'll never do it. Yes. I am the queen of really big goals with very little follow through. So this really speaks to me because like when those goals, when those desires are big, I'm like so fired up about them in the moment, but it's just too much. It's too much for one person in one body to do alone. So I'm going to cut it in half and I'm going to keep cutting it in half until the task in front of me is so easy I could like do it while also listening to an audiobook.
Exactly.
That's
and you're
what I'm aiming for.
You're an 8. With my 8s, we always talk about the fire and how they love to be like starburst supernova fire at all times. And I'm like, but what if you were a 1-wick candle today? And they're like, what?
Yeah, it's necessary.
Right? So that's what I hear in what you're saying too.
Oh my God. Thank you for that reflection. Sophia, where can people learn more about you and the work that you do in the world?
Yeah. So my leadership website is sophiaapostol.com. I imagine you'll probably link to it, Megan. I'm on Instagram under that name. The work that I do around anti-fatness is called Fat Joy. So I have a podcast called Fat Joy with Sophia Apostol where I interview really cool people like Aubrey Gordon, and I even got to talk to Adrienne Marie Brown, which was like
wow.
Oh yeah, I sobbed the whole time. I was ridiculous. I'm like, you're an angel. And she's like, okay, let's talk. Really amazing people. So Fat Joy and sophiaapostol.com are the two places I hang out.
And just in case you don't feel like looking at the show notes, that's Sophia, SOPHIA, APOSTOL.com.
Perfect. Yeah.
Sophia, I am so deeply grateful to you for who you are and how you show up in the world and the conversations that you are willing to have, and for being here. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to see when our paths cross.
Same here, Megan. This was wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Deeply Rested. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love to invite you to join the Deeply Rested weekly newsletter. You can sign up at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. I hope to meet you in my inbox very soon.